Always, Sammy Turner. And here's another under-celebrated great American soul singer. It's well known that the United States in the 50s was riven by racism. They still had segregation in parts of the South. Rock and roll may have sounded colorblind to me, listening to it coming out of the radio incessant, but for the artists actually making the music in America, the reality was very different. There are many examples. On that first American tour, as I said, we were playing Chuck Berry's 30 Days to Come Back Home every night. Or rather, we were playing 40 Days to Come Back Home, the cover of Chuck's song by Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, which had been a minor US hit in 1959. Well, Ronnie Hawkins was a white guy, and his original band, the Black Hawks, had all been black. They had met so much prejudice and had so much trouble getting gigs in the South in the early 50s that after the group disbanded, Ronnie had to replace them with an all-white band, which he renamed the Hawks. Pretty grim, huh? But you would assume that by the time Cliff Richard and the Shadows hit the States at the start of a bright new decade for the biggest show of stars for 1960, that kind of racism and bigotry would have been a long time dead and gone. Sadly, you would be wrong. When we got into New York in January 1960, the tour promoters showed us all onto two buses. The bill was split almost 50-50 between white and black artists, which was great. But we were not allowed to travel together. There was a white-skinned bus and a black-skinned bus. "You guys on this bus," the drivers told a group of us, "and you others on the other one." So it was Frankie Avalon, Bobby Rydell, Freddie Cannon, Johnny and the Hurricanes, the Shadows, and me on one coach, Clyde McPhatter, Sammy Turner, the Isley Brothers on the other. The white bus and the black bus. The Crests, the racially mixed doo-wop group, had to separate to travel. More than 60 years on, it sounds preposterous, right? Obscene, and it was. But I was an overawed teenager, keeping my head down, and none of the older stars questioned it. It was presented to us in a totally matter-of-fact way. This is how it is. And all of the black artists quietly accepted it. I guess they were used to it. It was utterly ridiculous. But the great thing was that once we got off the buses, the biggest show of stars for 1960 was completely colorblind. The promoters wouldn't let us travel together, but they couldn't segregate us backstage. And all the artists, whatever color, hung out together all the time. As well as being in and out of Clyde McPhatter's dressing room, I'd also drop in on Sammy Turner and the Isley Brothers. So would everybody else. The funny thing was, we never said anything to each other about the separate buses. There was no need. We knew it was simply a load of nonsense and just ignored it. We all chatted like friends, which we soon were. It was a tremendous example of a very strong belief that I have. No matter what kind of divided or troubled society rock and roll comes out of, it is always non-racist, because music fans don't care about color. They didn't then, and they don't now. It's all about the music. I was glad that everybody in the biggest show of stars for 1960 was getting on so well, because there was another black artist on the bill that I was desperate to meet. I had loved Sammy Turner's voice ever since I had first heard it on AFN and Luxembourg a year or so earlier. I'd heard Sammy singing a bluesy, slightly jazzy version of the old English folk song Lavender Blue, which was a smash for him in America, his biggest, in fact. But the tune that had really made me prick my ears up was a single that was a hit in Britain in the summer of 1959. The song was called Always. Always was a standard, really. It had been written by the composer Irving Berlin in 1925 for his partner, Ellen, who became his second wife the following year. The original sounded very much of its time, a mellow symphonic swoon like something your grandparents might listen to on a Sunday. Well, Sammy Turner was about to change all that. Sammy was a smooth rhythm and blues soul singer, and working with the producers Lieber and Stoller, he turned Always into a pure soul nugget. His molten voice was to die for, but there was so much more to the song than that. He made a slightly dated musical period piece sound sharp and contemporary. Sammy Turner's Always had a hip-pulsing, double-bass rhythm that urged it along, but also a fantastic, jaunty brass section that came in at a rakish angle. It made a terrific musical base for Sammy to unleash his golden tonsils and croon Irving Berlin's devoted words, "I'll be loving you, always, with a love that's true." The song wasn't rock and roll in sound, but it certainly was in spirit. At the same time, something about its exotic beat reminded me of the very first song in this book, from before the dawn of rock and roll, Sammy Davis Jr.'s In a Persian Market. It's a tune that almost defies analysis, but it doesn't defy enjoyment. Let me tell you, I'd have loved Cliff Richard and the Shadows to have a chance to record and release Always. It was a pretty good consolation, though, to get to hear Sammy Turner singing it live in America night after night. That tour had so many pinch-me moments. Here was one of them. Sammy Turner was in his late 20s by then and had served in the Korean War as a U.S. paratrooper. He was very much a man, while in truth, the Shadows and I were still boys. Yet when we nervously introduced ourselves, he could not have been more gallant or welcoming. He was a perfect gentleman. I can still remember every single word, note, and inflection of Always. I could sing it for you now, but no rehearsal. When I staged The Event at Wembley in 1989, it was the third song that I sang to those 72,000 fans. Those two concerts were so special, yet singing Always remains a standout moment in my mind. Given his phenomenal voice and talent, it's a total mystery to me that Sammy Turner's career fell away after Always. He had one more small American hit with Paradise in 1960, and then after that, nothing. Even when he signed to Tamla Motown, Berry Gordy couldn't work his magic for him. Well, I guess there are some consolations to careers that don't reach superstar heights. Unlike many artists in this book, Sammy Turner never lost his way in life, never crashed and burned, never died young and beautiful. As I write, he is still alive, and 91, and I'm sure he is still a perfect gentleman, a great man.